geography class.
Middle East.
This camera is like a silly robot that won't stand up. And it's like,
Have you asked him anything?
I haven't even read the booklet yet. I've had it for years. But the booklet is like this, you know. And it's in about 15 different languages. And it basically says, go to this website and it'll tell you everything. And the website's in China somewhere, you know. Well, good morning. I'm sorry if I've been confusing everyone, because I've changed the course somewhat over the last couple of semesters, so I've got more notes than I actually spend time covering in class, because I did more things with the latter Middle Ages than I do now, because I want to try to get to more contemporary people at the end of the course. So I've got some, you know, extra quiz questions and extra notes and stuff. But it is fascinating, and my main thesis, I would say, in general, was that mathematics is what causes the modern period, the reintroduction of algebra especially. And Descartes, we could already see, he's the one that gives us algebraic geometry. And Hobbes was a mathematician too, although clearly not as good, because a lot of his contemporaries were very critical of him, especially with regard to squaring the circle. Hobbes famously thought he could square the circle, and most of his contemporaries realized, no, it's impossible. And what they mean by that is, can you figure out a formula by which you could get from a square the area of a circle, even though the circle, of course, is shaped so differently. And Hobbes thought there would be a way that you could actually figure out a square that would equal the area of a circle. And apparently that's one of those things mathematically that you can't reconcile. But my quiz question for you was a give me. I mean, it doesn't matter which answer. Are you leaving already?
No, I was moving this front light. I need a charger. Yeah.
You want to plug it into me? No, I wouldn't be able to charge it. Although we gave my granddaughter, who's turned 5 on the 22nd, a little present that had Lilo or Stitch, I guess, and if you held Stitch in your hand, the electricity from your hand communicated to the little Stitch character, who then strummed a guitar.
Well, did she like it? Or is she like too young to kind of
She
appreciate it?
wasn't that interested in that. She was more interested in the garden that we gave her, which was a Lego garden. You had all the different kinds of plants and, you know.
Thank you.
Roll with them. Give it a reach.
Yes. Thank you.
Remind me not to trip over it. Okay. So the quiz question I had asked was, who do you think was more influenced by Galileo, Descartes or Hobbes? And obviously both were. I mean, Galileo was very influential, at least mathematically and physically. Right? His thing was motion, and Hobbes is clearly influenced because he treats the body as a machine. So he basically, in his Leviathan, which I showed you the image of it, but you can It is a fascinating read. I remember when I was reading it, I was absolutely astounded because I was going from the Middle Ages to this stuff, and it was all of a sudden like, whoa. I mean, he's clearly not contemporary. You know, he's trying to figure out how does the body, you know, work, and he's thinking that these hollow tubes. Remember, they hadn't discovered the flow of blood yet. That comes later, right? So what are all these hollow tubes doing? Hobbes thought that they were full of air, and that when I touch something, the air pressure through the tubes, you know, moves into the brain, and literally the motions. This is thanks to Galileo. You know, unless there's something to stop the motion, it keeps going. And so for Hobbes, all these motions that come from the hollow tubes, which transmit the pressure to the brain, the motions that enter the ears, the sounds, go into the brain and they keep moving. And really astounding to me was he thought that the reason we could see was because particles from the things that we're looking at enter into our eye. And I thought, what a horrible idea. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, that's like, we call that photons. And that's actually on the road to understanding what actually, at least as we understand it, works, right? It sounded funny though, you know, the particles from the chair are flying into my eye, and I thought, you know, that would hurt, wouldn't it? Yes.
So like when you died, did you think that like you just couldn't be affected by things anymore? Or was it like just, how was death working in that scenario? Like you kind of kept alive by touching things, like perceiving.
Oh, you're dead. Once you're dead, Hobbes clearly thinks that the body stops sensing anything.
Huh. Okay.
In fact, that's when we get into the difference between Hobbes and Descartes. Descartes has this mind-body dualism, which, you know, did he really believe this? You know, that's a question. Although, you know, where does it come in? Notice that he's a Roman Catholic, plus he's in Catholic France, and anything he says has to be okay with the theology of the power. I mean, you know, you can't just say anything in France and get away with it. Hobbes couldn't either, but he was dealing with a different religious situation because of Calvin. By the way, anybody think Calvin and Hobbes, what do you think of when you hear Calvin and Hobbes?
The old cartoon.
The old cartoon, right? You know, and I've looked this up so many times, and then I always forget. Is there a relationship? It's Waterman, Bill Waterman, right? Between Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoon, and the philosopher and theologian. And the answer is so apparently that's where Watterson, not Waterman, got the idea for the names, but I believe he also says that he doesn't actually use the characters as representative of them. And who's John Calvin? I should mention him. I did mention Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Notice that another Augustinian at the time was John Calvin, who left France because he got in trouble for the things he was saying about religion. And he went to Geneva, famously, and started his own religious community there, the Calvinists. One of the theologians that came to visit was John Fox, I think it was. No, wait. Knox, John Knox. Thank you. Sorry, I am getting older. But in any case, John Knox, who was from Scotland, became a Calvinist and returned back to Scotland, where he began Presbyterianism. And so you see these connections. between them. And the interesting thing about that, by the way, is Presbyterianism didn't believe in the hierarchy of the church telling people what to believe and so on. Instead, it was the wealthy people in the community who were the presbyters of the church, basically decided who the preacher should be and what the preacher should teach and so on and so forth. And it essentially became a democracy, an early democracy. I mean, it was obviously not all the people of the community, but what you had were these community leaders who then basically among themselves ended up dictating what the church ought to teach. And then they got the idea that the political leadership of the community ought to be the same, and the same as John Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland, and the end result is the beginning of democracy. In fact, if you believe in arguments of this sort, how the Scots invented the modern world, basically taking this tact that the Scots are the ones that start with a democratic-like church leading to a democratic-like community, which then ended up being taught at Edinburgh University and eventually led to Thomas Hobbes, who is inspired by this point of view to promote the social contract theory. So Hobbes thinks that the body is a physical machine, and literally, all these motions enter into the brain, and the brain takes these motions, and thoughts are what's going on in the brain as a result of all of these motions, physical motions. So very Galileo, and our reactions then are kind of mechanical reactions to what's going on in the brain, what's coming in, and so on. And by the way, when we get into the question of free will, for Hobbes, the body is completely deterministic. Everything's mechanical and dependent on previous cause and effect relationships. For Hobbes, you're free when your body can do what it wants to do. And you're not free when, you're tied to the chair and you can't get up, So free will for him is a matter of whether the body is restrained from doing what it wants to do because of the prior causes on the body. So it's not like there's some miracle that we can't explain of free, independent thinking on our part. For him, it's all mechanical, and yet at the same time, it makes sense to refer to it as your free choice. That's what you want to do, right? I want to drink a glass of water. Okay, I look at the water and it's all full of dirt, and I'm like, bleh, I'm not going to do that unless I'm in a place where that's the way water usually looks, which I guess. Yes, John.
Do you believe that, sitting in class is some sort of pseudo, diet form of, forcing your body against what it wants to self-defeat?
Well, we just like Aristotle says, we develop habits. If you sit too long, you get a dead butt. I just read that just this last week. There's actually a name for it. It's something like dead ass syndrome or something. Kind of official title. Basically an article that says don't sit too long. You've got to get up and move and so on. So if you're in a job where you sit in a chair all day and you don't get much chance to get up and you've got to make sure you get your 5 bullets, to say, I did these 5 things this week. All right, so that's a contemporary joke. I have to admit, I tried to think what my 5 bullet comments would have been, but, did I just spit in your direction? Sorry. We just ate cake that was spit on by a 5-year-old. And, we just went ahead with that, assuming that she didn't have any diseases to spread to us, because we love her mostly. And those that love us would never infect us with germs, at least not on purpose. Sorry. But so, yes, you train yourself to sit in chairs. That's, I would think that the main thing, though, that you're training yourself to do that the body doesn't want to do is sit in chairs and read. The main thing that you get out of college is reading and writing. And I don't know how that's affecting you, but reading long, drawn-out arguments and thinking about them, I think is one of the main characteristics of the educational experience that prepares you for being that kind of thinker when you graduate and begin a job where that's what they're really paying you to do, is think and figure things out. And so the habit of training your mind to concentrate through long arguments, 800 pages worth of argument, to convince people that the reason that that civilizations fall is because of these 5 factors, etc. So that seems to be what habit you're supposed to be getting out of that. I don't know that they had chairs in the Stone Age. I suspect that they sat on the ground a lot, maybe used some rocks. However, so Hobbes doesn't seem to believe in a separate mental thing like a spirit or a soul. If he talks about it, it seems almost clear that what he's trying to do is hide his real thoughts from people that might read it and figure he's not religious enough, that he ought to be burned at the stake or crucified or just decapitated, something nice, Decapitation was the nicer way to go. That's why they gave it to the queens that way, Please make sure you do it in one stroke, sir. I think they even paid a tip, to the executioners so that, they would do a good job. Because otherwise you end up like nearly headless Nick, and, that must have been awful. Thank you for being the one person to know who that is. Nearly headless? How could you be nearly headless? In the books, by the way, Hermione's not the one who says that. Seamus says that. I think. They changed a lot, I'd finished the book 5 in German last night, just for fun. That's the second time I did book 5. Auf Deutsch. That was a squirrel. So back to Hobbes. He is an Aristotelian. More so than I think Descartes was. Not as good as a mathematician, but for some reason we do think of Descartes as the one who gives us the modern period. So he's really, if you take a graduate record examination and they ask you who was the first modern, your answer should be Descartes, if you want to get the answer right. And I should be able to show you an interesting bit.
Yes, I am, but wait a minute, let me get this straight. You recognize me, a poet whose latest work sold 12,000 copies, but you do not recognize this gentleman who was a presidential candidate in America? My God, woman, what's
this is
happened to your
fiction.
values? What do you do?
I'm a scientist, and we do occasionally read poetry. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a lot of it these days. I'm on a sort of sabbatical. I'm an ex-physicist, an ex-American resident, an ex-voter.
Ex-wife? This is very upsetting.
This is an old movie.
How do intelligent people like yourself bother to poet?
But forgive me, you politicians make it so hard. The ideas expressed by most of you, right and left, seem to me as antique and mechanical as that old clock.
What's that supposed to mean?
Well, if I was to explain that, I'd have to go all the way back to Descartes, if you remember him.
Yeah. To be or not to be? I think therefore I am. Yeah, well, we both went to college.
Well, Descartes was the primary architect of the view that sees the world as a clock. A mechanistic view that still dominates most of the world today, and it seems to me, especially you politicians.
Mechanistic. Is that a real word? Mechanistic? Mechanical? Mechanics? Yeah. It's a good word.
Mechanistic, as if nature functions like a clock. You take it apart, reduce it to a number of small, simple pieces, easy to understand, analyze them, put them all back together again, and then you understand the whole.
Isn't that what's known as scientific thinking, Miss Hoffman? Really? What you call the mechanistic view, isn't that what the scientific method's all about?
Is it?
Well, I don't think so, but I'd like to kind of hear from the physicist, Jack.
All right, I'm sorry. Please continue.
Well, you're right in a way, Mr.
Jack. Call me Jack.
Okay, Jack, you're right in a sense. But it wasn't always so, not before Descartes. When he introduced such thinking, it amounted to a revolutionary break with the church. He said, I don't need a pope to tell me how the world functions, I can find that out for myself. Because to me, the world is just a machine. And then he became fascinated with clockworks and made the clock into a central metaphor. He said, I consider the human body as nothing but a machine. A healthy man is like a well-made clock. A sick man is like an ill-made clock.
Well, the metaphor seems a little clumsy now, but it works, doesn't it?
Yes, so successfully that scientists came to believe that all living things, plants, animals, us, are nothing but machines. And that's the fallacy. It carried over into everything, arts, politics,